As far as updates, I'll start with the summit today. There were about 4,500 earthquakes during the past week, so seismicity continues to be high at the summit. The most recent collapse event occurred just before 9 p.m. last night. It released energy equivalent to a magnitude 5+ earthquake, per usual, as we've been seeing. And like we've been seeing all along, after that event, the seismicity dropped, but we expect that throughout today, the earthquakes will begin to increase in number as we lead up to the next collapse event. Excuse me. Sulfur dioxide emissions at the summit remain low, on the order of 100 tons per day. On the lower East Rift Zone, the story is about the same. Fissure 8 remains the active vent. It's feeding lava into a channel that extends to the coast. And the ocean entry is still active near Ahalanui, but the south flow margin has not advanced any farther to the south and is still about 500 meters or 0.3 of a mile from the boat ramp at Isaac Hawley. SO2 emissions remain high on the lower East Rift Zone, and I think this is a great segue into the Weather Service report because of the disruption of trade winds and what that combination of disrupted trade winds and high SO2 emissions means.
Why don't we go directly to Derek Rowe? Derek is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Do you want to go ahead with your statement or address Janet's comment about the trades?
Yeah, I'll do both of those. That was a great lead-in. Thank you. Right now, typically this time of year, we get very few disruptions in the trade winds, and when we do, it's usually a little bit of a disturbance that's coming up from the deeper tropics that tend to be a bit more moist, and that's kind of the case today. That's what happened. One passed through. It's over on the western end of the state right now. It's more towards Kauai and Oahu. We had some rain here this morning, and it's raining on Kauai, so it's through the Big Island. But what it does is you tend to see a little bit of a wind shift associated with that, and that's exactly what's going on today. So the typical trade wind direction is from just north of due east, so that would be out of the east-northeast. And when you get features like this, sometimes the trades will shift around to be almost due east or even just a slightly out of the east-southeast, and that's exactly the case today. So their winds are more or less unchanged in terms of the magnitude. They're still blowing around 10 to 12 miles per hour like they have been for the past several days. But the wind direction has shifted just slightly. But that small shift means that instead of blowing down more towards the coast of southern Puna and down out towards the Kau area, that means that a lot of these emissions are pushing upslope across Pahoa. And we took a look at some webcams this morning, and there's even some evidence on that some of the emissions are getting up into the saddle between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. So that's really no big surprise that those emissions are doing that today. This disruption will be brief. It's going to be, once this feature moves through, the trades will go back to their normal direction, and that's going to be evolving overnight. So by tomorrow, things will be back to normal. Otherwise, everything is pretty much the same. It's stable. We don't really have much concern for heavy rain today. There'll be a couple of heavier showers over Pahoa just because that plume is being pushed up over them, but we're not expecting any problems. Other than that, I think that's all I have, unless there's questions.
Thank you, Derek, and we will go to questions in a few moments. Our next speaker is Jessica Farrakane with Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, and most of you know that Kilauea's summit is actually located in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. So, Jessica, what do you have for us today?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's status quo up here at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park for anybody who's keeping track of it. Today's day 74 since the park closed on May 11th. I am actually in the park right now working from the Visitor Emergency Operations Center behind closed doors with air scrubbers on because the air quality is in the very hazardous or red range up here. We are having terrible air quality conditions up here in Volcano. And not just in the park at the summit area, but also in Volcano Village. And again, as Janet pointed out, this is not emissions coming from the summit, but rather the lower East Rift Zone eruption site and the light trade winds. So that was a really good segue in from Derek at the Weather Service for me as well. So anyway, here I am. The other news, also you guys can also check the conditions on HawaiiSO2network.com to see real-time air quality conditions here in the park and the surrounding community. We've had a lot of earthquakes over the weekend. The most recent one did, again, more damage to Highway 11 and Crater Rim Drive. And we're working with HDOT, or the Hawaii Department of Transportation, on how to repair those and what's happening moving forward on those damages to the park roads. We, at this time, urge all motorists to drive slowly and carefully through Highway 11 and heed the 25-mile-per-hour signs. We do have an increased law enforcement presence right now maintaining the closure as well as the reduced speed limit through Highway 11. So please drive carefully. Lots of cracks, lots of buckling on a very unstable surface. And then my last message is a uplifting one. We have a Learn How to Pound Poi cultural workshop happening this Wednesday at the Moku Papapa Discovery Center in downtown Hilo from 10 to 12, and that is free. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. As we go over to questions, I want to remind people that there are 3 people who gave statements today. Janet Babb, a geologist with the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, Jessica Farrakane with the National Park Service, and Derek Rowe with the National Weather Service. We also have 2 other people on the line, experts who are available to answer any questions. Jim Kawahikawa is a former scientist in charge at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. He is a geophysicist and most recently been embedded with the Emergency Operations Center throughout this whole event. Also on the line is Steve Brantley, the Deputy Assistant Chief Geologist the Deputy Scientist in Charge at Hawaii Volcano Observatory. So as we open it up for questions, I'll ask reporters to please ask one question at a time so we can get as many people through in the next 15 minutes as we can. And Jennifer, we're open the lines for questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask a question from the phone, please press star followed by the number 1. Again, that's star 1 for any questions. Our first question comes from Nina Wu from the Star Advertiser. Your line is open.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Yes, so I did see that report to the Hawaii County Civil Defense. It was prepared, I think, July 15. The one thing that definitely stood out for me, it says the volume of lava erupted during the current activity exceeds that of many past eruptions. And given this volume and sustained withdrawals of magma, it's most likely this may continue for months to years. Can you elaborate on that? Is it months or years? That's a large range, and does it just depend on what happened?
Hi, this is Jim.
Hi.
That's why we said it was months, 2 years. We're not sure how long it'll last. So we can't be much closer than that in time, in duration.
What would make the difference between months and years? You mentioned ground deformation in this area, that there's the lack of significant ground deformation. I don't know what that means exactly, but also what would make the difference between months and years? I guess, could you draw out the 2 scenarios?
The lack of deformation in the area, despite Fissure 8 putting out 100 cubic meters per second, suggests that the Fissure 8 eruption has been fed directly from the summit.
Okay.
Hang on a second. So, because it's being fed by the summit, it's open to. It's not depleting the intrusion that started the eruption down in the Lower East Rift Zone. Being fed by the summit reservoirs, and so there's a lot more magma available to be erupted unless the conduit between the summit and the rift zone could be disrupted somehow.
Okay.
The range of time, months to years, is literally that. We cannot distinguish whether it's going to be months or years.
Is there, I think you might have touched on it a little in there, what is a possible scenario where it could just last for months, where there might be a disruption in the conduit, or?
Yes. But as with Pu'o'o, that erupted for 35 years, there were several disruptions in its conduit, and the eruption always came back to Pu'o'o. So the conduit disruption isn't a simple thing. It may or may not alter the eruption should a conduit disruption occur.
Okay. And when you say years...
We're going to move on to the next reporter. We ask for one question at a time. We'll circle back if you have additional questions. Thank you.
Just a reminder, that is star one for any questions. And the next question comes from Austin Westfall from Hawaii News Now. Your line is open.
Hi there. I want to ask about Halemaumau Crater. I know you guys have talked about the summit feeding fishery. I'm just wondering what this means for the future of the Halemaumau Crater. I know it had that lava lake that was in it for a long time. I guess I'm just asking, could we see that lava lake return? Do we think maybe activity has shifted to fishery only going forward? Do you guys have any indication as to what might happen?
Hi, this is Steve Brantley. The Halemaumau crater continues to enlarge as the adjacent parts of the Kilauea crater floor slump and slide into the center of Halemaumau. And in that sense, it's similar to the activity that occurred in the 1800s. There were similar collapses that occurred, followed by the rise of magma into the new crater or collapsed area to form lava lakes, and then collapsed again. So one of those scenarios could be a series of collapses. If magma intrudes into the upper parts of the volcano again and accumulates, it might result in a lava lake. We certainly don't know that at this point in time, but in the long run, that probably is quite likely. We simply don't know how long or how much larger the Halemaumau crater will become. It can get much larger than it is today.
So it's definitely not dead?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
And we have Nina back from Star Advertiser. Your line is open.
Oh, hi there. Yes. So, yeah, I understand that, all of this is unpredictable, but I'm just curious to know what kind of scenario might lead to this occurring for years. And I know when years, I'm not sure, is that 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? Is that all unknown?
We were as precise as we can be in the phrase months to years.
Could you map out a scenario showing how this could last for years? I mean, if the summit just kept on continuing, this is unprecedented. I don't think this has ever... is this unprecedented?
No, it's not unprecedented. As we stated, Pu'o'o erupted for 35 years. There were other eruptions around from the Kilauea's East Rift Zone that, for example, Mauna Ulu lasted 5 years. Hulu, a little bit farther down the Rift Zone, lasted for at least a decade or two. It was several hundred years ago, so we don't have the exact duration, but by volume, it lasted quite a long time. So these types of eruptions that go into years are not unknown from Kilauea. They're just not that usual.
All right. However, is this unusual in terms of the volume?
I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean the total volume of the eruption or the eruption rate?
Oh, I meant as far as the total volume thus far.
Just trying to think. Well, certainly the volume would go up with the duration of the eruption. And so for 35 years, one would expect the erupted volume to be much more than for Honolulu, for example, that erupted for about 5 years. Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, I guess, okay. All right. No, I mean, that's it. I guess that's pretty much, I mean, there's a couple different scenarios up here. I think 3 different scenarios, but there's just no telling, it sounds like, what will happen. It could be anyone's guess then.
This is Steve Brantley. You're quite right that the volume that has been erupted so far from the lower East Rift Zone is quite high compared to the volumes of the historical eruptions dating back to 1840. So if we look at the 1840 example, the 1960 and 1955 is stated in that report.
Okay.
The current eruption exceeds the erupted volumes of those eruptions. And it's, I think as Jim has said before in different ways, the continued subsidence of the crater up at Halima'umau implies directly that magma is withdrawing from their summit reservoirs and moving into the East Rift Zone and down to Fissure 8. And so there's a very large volume of magma there that can supply lava at the current rate for quite some time, for months. And so we simply can't provide specific bounds on that general time frame of months to years.
I see. Okay, thank you. That was helpful.